I was just asked about the Nazi stance toward the Arabs as Semitic people. And I had overlooked a point that I intended to make, namely that in 1936, the German, this is when the German connection to Ackerman Hosseini is solidifying, firming up Muslim Brotherhood. The German Foreign Ministry issued a statement saying that the Nuremberg laws apply only to Jews and do not include Arabs. And they went to some lengths to explain that the Arabs are not part of their, the Semitic racial category. Of course, anti-Semitism is about Jews. It was never about Arabs. Anyway, at least not after the turn of the 20th century. So it's not surprising that you tweak your text and your views and your statements to suit a political agenda, and not the other way around. I mean, first you set the agenda, then you set the discourse. This is similar in the Charter of Allah, the Hamas Charter. And I have several texts from the Charter to try to convey, who the people of Hamas are, what their aims are, where they're coming from, what they have in common with Nazis. Here too, they draw on, I mentioned earlier, they draw on mainly three sources: the Quran, Hadith, and Protocols of the Elders of Zion. But they selectively, pick what passages suit their agenda from the Quran, from the Hadith. As Haras Rafiq was telling me, and I would encourage all of you to get to know Haras, because he's a brilliant and wonderful and courageous individual. That if you want to prove that Palestine belongs to the Jews, you can go to the Quran for that as well. So this is one of the texts. Now, one other thing. Notice that how the invocation of Scripture, of God's Word, legitimizes the agenda. This is a little different from the Nazis. Hitler claimed he was doing the Lord's work, but he wasn't known to quote the Hebrew Scriptures, or even the Christian Scriptures. At least not to the extent that you see in the Hamas chart. So, Article 7, after Article 2, explains that Hamas is a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. The preamble quotes Hassan al-Banna, his statement that Israel will be a threat until they no longer exist, so we have to wipe them out. And here you have the from the Al-Bukhari Hadith. The Hadith is a collection of texts, writings, stemming from an oral tradition, sayings and teachings attributed to the Prophet that don't appear specifically in the Quran. Okay. It's sort of like the oral Torah, only not exactly. Here, the Prophet says the Hadith, Allah bless him and grant him salvation, has said the day of judgment will not come about until Muslims kill the Jews. The stones and trees will say, "O Muslims, O Abdullah, there's a Jew behind me, come and kill him." Notice how nature itself vomits up the Jew. The trees and the stones reject the presence of the Jew. The Jew is an alien presence in the landscape of the natural world. Article 11, Palestine is an Islamic waqf, land consecrated for Muslim generations until Judgment Day. So, what does this mean? It's not just real estate. It's not occupied territory. It's not strategic territory. It's consecrated. In other words, it falls to a sacred tradition, and therefore you have a sacred duty to hold on to it, and if you lose it, to get it back. It has not only been reconquered, whether it's Spain, North Africa, Israel, it has been desecrated. So you can't. You can't be a good Muslim and let it go. Is the idea. So to ask the Muslim to negotiate, to trade land for peace, is heresy. It's asking him to renounce Islam. So therefore, peaceful solutions are in contradiction to the principles of the Islamic resistance movement, Hamas. So you see that the discourse here is a little different from the National Socialist discourse. This is what sanctifies jihad. Jihad becomes almost a sixth pillar for Islamic jihadists. The pillars are what? The belief, the shahada, salat, prayer, zakat, charity, Psalm, fasting, and the Hajj, the pilgrimage. Jihad is like a sixth pillar for Hamas. Jihad is the only way. If the only way to be a good Muslim is to retake the consecrated land, to liberate the land from the evil of the Jewish presence, then jihad is necessary to being a good Muslim. And in fact, the Hamas and other branches of the Brotherhood teach that donating money to the jihadist movement counts as zakat, as charity. So you can meet that obligation by funding the movement. And so because jihad is the only way, you have Article 15, a couple articles later, again invoking a line, appropriating a line from the Hadith, I will assault and kill, assault and kill, assault and kill, as a religious duty. As a religious obligation. What is the religious obligation of a good Muslim mother? Article 18. To raise her children for jihad. This is not how, anyway, I'll just leave it. Article 22, this is where the Jews come in. This is where you see a more direct Nazi influence. The Nazis would talk about mothers raising children for the Volk, for the Fuhrer. But jihad is another step, it seems to me. The Jews are behind the French Revolution, the Communist Revolution, most of the revolutions. With their money. They formed secret societies such as Freemasons, Rotary clubs, the Lions clubs, and others for the purpose of sabotaging societies and achieving Zionist interests. Sabotaging societies. With their money, they were able to control imperialistic countries. The Jews are behind everything. Remember Hitler's reference to Jews as the invisible wire pullers in Mein Kampf. You can stand to read Mein Kampf. Control imperialistic countries and instigate them to colonize many countries in order to enable them to exploit their resources and spread corruption. The contagion. I mentioned, the European powers, is the colonial enterprise of European countries and others. The Jews are behind that. The Jews are behind revolution. Of course, the French Revolution, Communist Revolution, are, decadent and atheistic. It's spreading corruption. I once had a student who said, well, what if the Jews did rule the world? What would be so bad about that? I said, well, you don't understand. It's not that the Jews are ruling the world, they're corrupting the world. They're destroying the world. The fabric of society, the moral character, decency, family, etc. The Zionist invasion. The Zionist invasion is an invasion of the planet. There's one of the images that you see in jihadist propaganda images is the octopus, right? That they get from many. If you look at the propaganda, the cartoons, images, many of them come right out of Der Stürmer. Right? The octopus with the tentacles wrapped around the world. There's one that shows the octopus encompassing the world, and the caption says "occupied territory." So the occupied territory is not the West Bank, it's not Gaza, it's not even Tel Aviv and Netanya, which many of them see as the occupied territory. It's the planet. The Zionist invasion of the world uses all evil. It's not that all Jews are evil, but all evil is Jewish. They use all evil to achieve its end. The aim at undermining societies, destroying values, corrupting conscience. Whereas Hitler claimed that conscience was the invention of the Jews, the jihadists allow room for it, except the Jews corrupted, deteriorating character and annihilating Islam. So here you have the Manichaean division, Islam good, Jews, Judaism evil. The Zionist invasion is behind the drug trade and alcoholism so as to facilitate its control and expansion. Note this: Israel, Judaism, and Jews. Israel, Judaism, and Jews. They're one and the same. Pose a threat to Islam and the Muslim people. You can't separate them out. And certainly, whether you're Nazi or Hamas jihadist, you can't say, well, we're okay with Judaism, it's just the Jews we can't. We're okay with the synagogues as long as there are no Jews going to the synagogue. Judaism, Jewish teaching, tradition, testimony is interwoven with the Jewish people, whether this Jew or that Jew believes anything or not. So it's not reducible to a political issue, an issue of territory or real estate or land. It has this metaphysical, again, apocalyptic dimension. Here we go. After Palestine, Zionists aspire to expand from the Nile to the Euphrates. They will aspire to further expansion. How do we know? It says so in the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. Of course, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion say nothing about the state of Israel. But the protocols do have passages concerning expansion, takeover. We go here, we go there, we'll take this, we'll take that. So Hitler in Mein Kampf describes the Zionist enterprise as not about seeking a haven or a homeland, but seeking to set up a base of operation from which the Jews will proceed to take over everything they possibly can. In 1922, Alfred Rosenberg wrote a book on Zionism, making this case that Zionism is about Jewish world domination. It's not about Jews fleeing pogroms or wars or violence in Europe or anywhere else. It's about world domination. How do we know? Protocols of the Elders in Zion so indicate. What are the ramifications of all this? Once the Jew is not only a member of a race or an ethnic group or even a religion, a social unit, a class, or whatever, but is part of a universal and invisible evil, then the Jew becomes as invisible as Satan and just as ubiquitous. Therefore, the solution to the problem has to be ubiquitous. You have to go to the ark. You have to rule everything everywhere. And I'll talk about this tomorrow when I go more deeply into Muslim Brotherhood and Sayyid Qutb and others. But those who argue that Abdul al-Maududi is another one, who argue that Islam has to aspire to control the entire world. That's the only way you can free the world of the ubiquitous, hidden presence of the satanic Jew. Good will prevail only when all evil is eradicated. So this is why, my claim is that the war against the Zionist entity is ultimately a metaphysical war. Lest we think it's only about occupied territory, the Salafist Sheikh Muhammad Hussein Yaqub clears that up for us. This is a broadcast from an Egyptian television, 2009, where, on what channel? Okay. Where he says, if the Jews left Palestine to us, would we start loving them? So no, they're enemies not because they occupied Palestine. They would have been enemies even if they did not occupy a thing. Our fighting with the Jews is eternal. Not until a single Jew remains on the face of the earth. Until not a single Jew remains on the face of the earth. It's total. The exterminationist anti-Semitism here is as total as the National Socialist anti-Semitism. It's not. It's a different manifestation of anti-Semitism from, for example, when the Jews were expelled from England in 1290. To some extent, because the people owe them money. How do I get rid of my debt? I get rid of the Jews, the one I owe the debt. Robert Wistridge, as he's known in Israel. The late Robert Wistridge, one of the pioneers in anti-Semitism studies. You can't go into the study of anti-Semitism without Wistridge. He makes this statement about the relationship between jihadism and National Socialism. It's referring to the jihadists. It says their Bible may be the Quran and not Mein Kampf, but the mental structures and worldview have striking analogies. They falsely claim to speak for frustrated, underprivileged, and impoverished masses betrayed by more traditional Arab and Muslim ruling elites. And the jihadist leaders come from the upper echelons of society. They're all highly educated. Anti-Semitic conspiracy theories lie at the very heart of the Muslim fundamentalist and Arab nationalist worldview today, says Twister. Linking together plutocratic finance, international Freemasonry, secularism, Zionism, and communism as dark, occult forces led by the giant octopus of international Jewry. This mythical structure of thought is in many ways virtually identical with Nazi anti-Semitism. It also has its differences, I would point out.
From whose book, Lethal Obsession?
Yes, A Lethal Obsession, yes. That 1,200-page volume. This is, as I see it, a difference. Anti-Semitism aspires to eliminate the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And you can do that either through usurpation or appropriation. The Nazis undertake the usurpation of God, it seems to me. And I realize this requires a much bigger argument than I have time to play out. But, as soon as the word of the Fuhrer becomes law, as Eichmann testified at his trial, and Eichmann wasn't the only one to make this statement, then the Fuhrer has usurped the throne of God. The party, the folk, take the place of the commanding voice of God. In the case of Hamas, by calling the charter Allah, Hamas is Allah. Hamas becomes the purveyor of the divine truth, the divine word. Hamas selects the scriptures that are scriptural, that apply. Hamas decides who is damned and who is saved. Hezbollah describes itself as a clearinghouse for all humanity. Allah, the party of Allah. So, and the jihadists aren't the only ones in history who make this move of appropriating God and taking over the divine throne of judgment, pronouncing judgment on this person and that. So it's the jihadist incorporation of scriptures is a little different. Making the extermination of Jews a condition for entering paradise is a little different from the Nazi history. The Nazis don't talk about, they don't say if you kill Jews you'll go to heaven. They don't. There were priests during the Crusades who made such a statement. And then you know, some of the bishops higher up said, no, that's not true. But, I mean, you see it then, but the point here is you can't be a good Nazi or a good jihadist without embracing the exterminationist anti-Semitism. This is different from the Christian anti-Semitism that you see unfolding during the Crusades. Jews slaughtered by the thousands. Over the 9 major crusades, some estimates go as high as 200,000 Jews. It's a period of 170 years or so. Nobody's sure the exact number, but thousands of Jews were killed. One difference is that during the Crusades, you could object to the killing in the name of Christianity. You can invoke your text and your teaching, say, hey, we're going too far. And remain a Christian. In fact, you might say the only way you could remain a Christian is to object. You could make that case. For the Nazis and the jihadists, where the usurpation and appropriation of God is taken to its ultimate end, there is no going too far. You can't reject that agenda, that exterminationist agenda, and remain a Nazi in good standing or a jihadist in good standing. Now, has anybody read Hitler's last political will and testament written in the bunker before he killed himself? This is how he ends. He ends that with his last written words. He's in the bunker. He extends his plea to the world to continue to resist mercilessly the poisoner of all nations, international Jewry. Now, who has taken up that task? Who has most systematically, with the widest organization, finance, heeded that call? There are, I don't know, between 60 and 70 or so neo-Nazi, white supremacist organizations, at least according to Wikipedia. There are others who hate Jews, hate anybody who's not white, who invoke Hitler and so on. But the movement that, as I said, is most systematically, ideologically, largest numbers and so on, with tanks and weapons and aircraft, is the Islamic jihadist, or the Islamic jihadist movements. And tomorrow, when I talk about the Muslim Brotherhood, I'll go into that. So here you are. These are actually members of Hezbollah heeding the call of the Fuhrer. Why does this matter? Why talk about it? Actually, Jeremy Corbyn made this comment about Hezbollah and Hamas. That the Hamas is dedicated to bringing about long-term peace and social justice and political justice. If I'm a member of Hamas, I'll say, that's right. You got it right. But what is the peace? What is the justice, the political and social justice? When people in the Western liberal democracies hear peace, social justice, and political justice, they're not thinking the same thing as what Hamas invokes these terms. So we have our work cut out. Thanks. That's it.
So please signal to me, I'll take down your names. I'm going to start off with a question. I'm going to kind of repeat my question again.
Oh, no.
Yeah. No, it's something that, I'm sort of sitting here, I'm going to try to ask you a question as a scholar or as an activist. And maybe it's not a fair question. Maybe we can open up for discussion if you don't have a question, if you don't have an answer. But what you just described is obviously at a level extraordinarily disturbing. The fact that Nazi anti-Semitism is not, relegated to the history books, but that not only is Hamas and the political Islam and jihadism functioning in the world today in many societies, not only are so-called pseudo-hypocritical Western liberals. Judith Butler said the same thing, a leading serious intellectual, that what Corbyn said, that it's alive politically, and more so as scholars, it's really vibrant in the universities. There are departments and research centers and professorships that are propagating this worldview. So as scholars, which Oxford University is literally one. The Islamic studies at Oxford University, there are leading intellectuals who espouse this stuff in a sophisticated way. They know the language of postmodernity and multiculturalism and social democracy, but they espouse it effectively. Tariq Ramadan, and there are many other intellectuals who espouse the same stuff. As scholars of anti-Semitism, and those of us who are concerned about respecting the other, human rights, creating a university in the real sense of a place of exchanging ideas and searching for truth, what do we do as a small community?
When I ventured into the study of anti-Semitism from Holocaust studies, I encountered an interesting phenomenon, which I also have encountered in Holocaust studies, namely the occasional, sometimes more than occasional even, animosity toward Judaism or being too Jewish. I've been accused in my approach to anti-Semitism and Holocaust as being accused of being too Jewish. This is too Jewish. This should be published by Mesorah publishers and not by an academic press. It's too Jewish. So there's a phenomenon of what I call Holocaust studies without the Holocaust. And I think maybe in some quarters of anti-Semitism studies, you have anti-Semitism studies with a kernel of anti-Semitism. In other words, or anti-Judaism. The animosity is, I think, toward the Judaism that Jews signify just by hanging around. It's an animosity toward being infinitely implicated. It's a hiding, like as Adam hid. It's a hiding from the question of where are you, because we're always late. Our task in life is to answer "Here I am" to the outcry of our fellow human being, and the Hineni is a movement toward the other human being. Here I am for you. It's affirming the relationship, the ethical responsibility, which is always more than I can live up to. So it's much easier to formulate an ideology made of fixed formulas and ready answers, whether it's in the political ideology, left-wing or right-wing ideology, religious ideology. The fixed formula and ready answer is a way of silencing the question, where are you? Where's your brother? What have you done? So I think one thing that, for me, one thing that I try to do, is to get Judaism into the mix. It doesn't matter whether you are a follower of Judaism or not. The question is, what is the way of thinking? What is, as I said early on, what is the view of the other human being? What is my accountability to and for the other human being? For example, the teaching, love your neighbor as yourself. It's a cliche, I suppose. If you look at the text, it's the kamocha, as Levinas interprets it, tells you it's not as yourself, but that is who you are. You are that loving relationship. Kamo, you are like that. You are the relationship. And of course, in the Hebrew, the neighbor is not the object of the verb. It's la re'echa. You be loving toward your neighbor. Be giving toward your neighbor. The root of love, ahava, is ha, which means to give. Have a giving attitude toward your neighbor. The orientation toward the other human being that Judaism espouses has to get into the conversation, whether you name it Judaism or not. in much of the thinking that drives academia, at least portions of academia, there's no orientation toward an ethical accountability to and for the other human being. There's a lot of division. So it's getting the metaphysics back into it, I think, is the way to go for me.
As a footnote, the first lecture was by Akiva's wife, who's a rabbi. Never lectured at the university before, and he brought this sort of message of a very simple but profound message of recognizing the other and the ethics of it. Profound, simple and profound.
So you spent a lot of time emphasizing the Hamas charter. Have you studied the PLO charter? Has it changed over time? Because much of it is done after the Clinton era. And how alike are the two charters?
No, they have the charters haven't been altered in either case. You can't change the charter of Allah. How are you going to change that? You can write, supplements, which they've been doing, but they haven't trashed the charter. They can't. The PLO charter makes much less use of scriptural texts. The PLO, sometimes the PLO is cast in terms of they're the secular organization. It's not exactly the case. When you speak of that region, and use terms like religious and secular, the distinctions are not as clear as, say, in America, where you talk religious secular. Even if you say religious Jews, religious Muslims, you're talking about a wide range of people. So PLO, the so-called secular organization, requires swearing an oath to Allah when you become part of the PLO. And their discourse shifts over the decades from more secular to more religious. They have a mufti, they have, but another difference is that Hamas is much more overtly promoting Sharia than PLO. PLO is not necessarily about, we got to have Sharia law.
You have to be very careful because Hanan Ashrawi is a Christian, and the PLO has a lot of and has the remnants of Christianity. It was not a Muslim organization.
It's true, and they have Christian supporters.
Right, but I'm talking in terms of answering that, the PLO and the PLO charter, the history of the PLO and the history of Hamas, or the history of Ramallah and the history of Gaza, if we were to go in that direction, which is where you're going. But to look to blur the boundaries there is to make a gross ideological distortion of what the ideologies are and the history between the two movements and where they're going in the younger generation altogether.
Well, younger generation. Yeah. Fair enough, yeah.
About that. I've been studying Palestinian media for many years, and I'm working on European Islam mostly. And everybody knows that, right? This sign. Arafat sign, V for victory. So PLO has been using this sign for all their history in order to show that their struggle is a non-religious struggle for territory. It's more like a national struggle. Now Hamas has been using this as well, at first. Lately, we've been seeing that in demonstrations in Gaza, after Ismail Haniyeh was transferred to the be instead of Khalid Mashal, the head of the whole Hamas movement and of the official. He is the official press secretary now, and in his place is Yahya Sinwar. Yahya Sinwar used to be the head of the let's say, the military branch is Adina Qassam of Hamas. And they have a lot of competition there in Gaza, politically wise, because they have a lot of Salafis. And the Salafis are having more power. So Hamas has to, to be more resilient. So now instead of showing this, they're showing that. Do you know what that means?
I can't see it, I can't see it.
Muslims would know what that means. That means Tawheed, believe in one Allah. This is what ISIS is showing. Al-Baghdadi used to show it all the time. Al-Qaeda is showing that. Now Hamas is also showing that. Why? It's a political struggle for them. They really need to show that they are more of the good Muslims than the Salafis say they are. And you know what happened right now in the PLO Ramallah in the last demonstrations? This. Even though there are Christians there. There is a big difference between what PLO used to be and what it is now. And these demonstrations that involve a lot of young people are now much more radicalized than they used to be. And they don't even have enough Christians right now in Ramallah to attend these demonstrations because there are not enough Christians right now in Ramallah.
There's no argument there. The point is, as scholars, we can make a choice. I mean, I don't want to take it, I'm just going to say this and then I'll say tomorrow. As scholars, we can be intellectuals and try to understand coldly various processes.
Definitely.
And distinguish between our own preferences and the way we put together facts and how we interpret them. And distinguish all of that from our activities as political activists. And sometimes there's a huge disjuncture between our political activism and the conclusions that we may have as we go through an intellectual analysis. Bethlehem isn't Christian anymore. Bethlehem is already practically Muslim. But that's a different issue. And so the only thing I was responding to is that if we as scholars, people who teach, blur everything, it becomes almost impossible to persuade a student. Because any student with brains, and there are a lot that are not, there are a lot of scholars who don't have any, but anyone who has any brains and is a student and is very careful can pull out the text on Amalek and talk about Jewish genocide, and we wouldn't want that to happen.
So just to, I want to bring it back. I think I did social and cultural geography, so I'll go to demographics and the shrinking community of Christians and other minorities in the Palestinian Authority and in Gaza and the Middle East in general. And this is very much sort of scientific evidence that is existing. There's processes that have been put in place. And in fact, I'm proud to, some of you know this, but ISGAP is holding a series event in conjunction with the Vatican. It's an official ISGAP Vatican symposium in Rome on the 13th of September, in which ISGAP is inviting Christians and Copts, moderate Muslims, Yazidis, women, and other minorities to look at a conference where Pope Francis will be, and it will be on anti-Semitism and minority rights in the Middle East, regional implications and international implications. And there is something happening that we need to, as scholars, acknowledge and understand, and people, as we speak, we were here last year together, and we've been doing this for a few years, and we sit here, and this movement that we're beginning to analyze as scholars, and as David said, I think we've come to this very late as scholars. We've been kind of perhaps willfully blind or blinded for various reasons. But as we speak, there is this reactionary social movement that is unleashing its violence in the most horrendous way. Recent reports are 600,000 murdered, 12 to 14 million refugees. And when political leaders like Corbyn, or intellectual leaders like Judith Butler and others in her in her school of thought, blur these boundaries and impose sort of political ideology on the reality, I think as scholars we really need to unpack it, and hopefully we will do it here from different perspectives. So there are a bunch of
Okay, so I just wanted to add on the conversation that you began about I guess 2/3 of the way through when you were talking about the expulsion of Jews from England Part of the rationale, at least the thesis that you put forward, was that that had, I don't know to what extent you thought that had to do with, and I'd be interested to hear, the fact that they were collectors of debt, and that was the best way to get rid of your debt, get rid of the Jews, right? And in that context, in terms of the lending of money, in that circumstance. I would just like to add to that, though, that Queen Elizabeth I, had her great decree of expelling the blackamoors from England, right? And her rationale wasn't that we're kicking them out because they're black, although we could think that alterity had a lot to do with that. So I want to think about it in terms of alterity as well, because she said they were being kicked out because they were, for the most part, infidels. And she said, and on top of that, and this was very curious to me as a Christian, she said they're infidels, we're kicking them out, they're infidels, and they have, quote, no comprehension of the gospel. As someone who comes from a proselytizing religion, right? They say, well, how would you get them out? Convert them, right? But they were being kicked out for being infidels, and Jews would be seen as infidels by a Christian Queen Elizabeth first, right? Yeah. So that would have to have been a part of the expulsion as well.
Sure, okay. Yeah, no doubt about it. Christ goes. But what distinguishes the Jewish infidel from your run-of-the-mill non-Jewish infidel is this, that the Jews know that what they're rejecting when they reject the Redeemer. They wrote the book on how to recognize the Messiah. They know perfectly well Jesus is the Messiah, and yet, when salvation is offered to them, they say no. Now, who would do that? Who but somebody in the service of Satan would do that? So they're not only infidels, they are the ones who kill God, who kill the God-man.
Yeah.
They have to be evil, it's not just a non-believer in your midst, it's an evil in your midst.
Oh, yes, I was just trying to expand the definition of why, the categories, as to why.
Yeah, it's not,
that would be a part, their being infidel would be a part, the alterity, their Jewness would be a part.
It's the main.
The blackness would be a part.
It's the main.
Okay, but I didn't hear that with the
thank you for
that
asking.
part.
No, but it didn't. Part of the mix is the money limit.
That's why I was curious here. And I wanted to know what percentage of that you thought was.
No, I think the driving thing is the evil in your midst that you have to expel.
Okay.
The Jews were expelled from almost every country in Europe at one point or another. But thank you. Now, I wanted to what you mentioned on what we do as scholars. You mentioned of that is dealing with facts and dealing with data, which we have to do. And part for me. Part of that is going to the text, the sources. What does Hitler say in Mein Kampf? What does Albana say in his essays? What does Kutub say? What do they say? It's not the only thing you go to, but that's part of it. What are their words? And I think words have to be taken seriously. Yes.
I want to stress the point that the PLO was actually in any time a more Arab organization, which means Palestine is a part of the Ummah, the Arab nation. So the Christians and the Jews could be seen like a minority, an accepted, tolerated minority, but not as equals. When you put the word Ummah in your charter, I think it was the first and second article of the charter, you have the priority of Arab nation and it is implying that Islam is a superior religion in this country. Even if it's a little bit blurry and you can, as a Christian, say, okay, we have an Arab nationalism who can be seen as a more liberal nationalism than the word Ummah is I think it's something like an indicator for the direction of this organization.
Good point.
Yes. So David, thank you very much for showing all these quotes and speaking about the analogy between the jihadism and the Nazism. I just wonder, as a teacher, when I come to class, and definitely I would have a few Muslim students. Carlton, maybe it's also a question for you. What would be the appropriate methodological approach to speak about that without a kind of isolating these students? Because every Muslim student who sits in the class seeing these quotes will think, just a second, what does it say about me as a Muslim? Where do I stand there? So what would be your recommendations?
That's a good question. In the graduate program, Holocaust Studies, which where I teach, we have Holocaust Studies as an area of concentration for students doing degrees either in literary studies or history of ideas. And we have 17 seminars on or related to the Holocaust. And I personally have students from Egypt, Libya, and Saudi Arabia in those seminars who, as you say, you're talking about the Muslims, are you talking about me, or what? First, and also, when you speak about the history of Christian anti-Semitism, you've got Christian students in the room too. Are you talking about me? I mean, most of them never heard about the blood libel, for example, in America anyway. European Christendom is very different from American Christendom. American kids who go to church never heard a sermon end with, and now go get those Christ killers of Jews. I mean, almost never. So, similarly,
Which is part of America.
okay, then. So Islam is also quite varied. It's not, and I use in a calculated way on jihadists and jihadism in order to indicate this is the movement and the line I'm talking about. I'm not talking about all this. And any of us have times in our traditions that we're perhaps not proud of. But if you enter into it in good faith, if you approach the topic from the premise that this is about answering, here I am for you, to your fellow human being. This is about bringing depth to our understanding of the infinite dearness of the other human being and how fragile that is. It's a good, it helps a lot. I mean, attitude is very important in the classroom. I mean, the attitude that you go in there with. Your ability to listen. Of course, this is, I mean, when you're dealing with a PhD seminar, you got 10 people around the table. It's different from, a class of 50 people you're lecturing to. So, I mean, I can do, and I have the luxury of working with PhD students, so I can go student to student. I see them individually in my office a lot. I listen carefully to what they say. I try to be very responsive. So, I mean, listening is very important to good teaching. And establishing a human-to-human relationship with them. Understanding that every tradition has its wisdom.
You direct that also to me, so when this one.
Please, go.
So, thank you. I think that's a brilliant question, David. And it really gets at the heart of what I think ISGAP and educators around the globe might consider as we attempt to teach well, teach responsibly, to teach honestly, and with rigor. There are a couple of things. One is to understand something that this great scholar of pedagogy, Lisa Delpit, says. She has a book called Other People's Children. and she's talking to teachers about how to manage their classroom, how to manage instruction, and how to engage with meaningful relationships. And she points out a couple things. She says, the educator, and I think you may see this in the video clip we showed yesterday from ISGAP, that's on the homepage, that there are different kinds of relationships. You have the relationship of the teacher to the content, right? And hopefully the teacher has very solid mastery of that. You have the relationship of the teacher to the student. And you have the student to student and student to the content. So in multi-directional ways, these must be governed responsibly with accountability. But she also says, please recognize that the classroom is a place of power. It is a place where power is acted out. So she kind of presents almost a realpolitik question. Say like, I'm the professor, so I have a certain kind of authority, and a lot of professors get very caught up in that. It's very seductive. We also have to deal with the fact that professors can be wrong, as we know. You talked about the Islamic Center here, right? And people come from different positions, ideologically or not. I sat in a class my freshman year, being an honor student, having known nothing but A's, with a professor whom they call Fascist Frank. The kids call him all Fascist Frank. I answered a question in class, which was directly related to something in the textbook. He leaned forward and said, oh, that's very interesting, Carlton. It must be racial. Are you from the south side of Chicago? I pointed out that no, in fact, I was not. But even if I had, that didn't matter, because the reference I had was a text, which I had just read. And I pointed him to the 3 examples. So he apologized, said, oh, I was from the south side of Chicago, that's why I asked. Right? The classroom is a place where power is acted out, so we must engage that. That goes back, I think, also to your point, that we should attempt to present clear water. Clear water, which is truth, right? Clear water. And that's our responsibility. And to present it as clearly as possible. And to honor those who are searching for clear water.
So if I can riff off after that, before I ask Larry, ask his question. I think what you said is very important. Extraordinarily important for the classroom, for teachers and interacting with students. But also there's power in the classroom. It's not just the power between the instructor, the teacher, the professor, and the student, giving and receiving, or just giving and not hearing. But there's also power dynamics in the reading list, right? There's power dynamics in the University. Oxford is an amazing example of a history of power relations. And it played a role in power relations, not just in terms of the education that people received in the classroom, but how this power was projected out into the country and into the world. And we're living in a situation now, or our education system is in a situation now, where I think as scholars we really need to take stock of how knowledge is being produced, who's buying the universities, and I say that literally, who's contributing to creating institutes, chairs, who's producing what kind of materials that are being read, who's silencing, who's empowering. And I think as scholars, we're situated in these institutions, we have to understand the power dynamics that we're facing. And the fact that David's lecture, I think, is so important, it points to something that's still alive, that Nazi ideology, and I'm using my words carefully, Nazi ideology, exterminationist ideology when it comes to the Jews, is being literally taught in these institutions. And we have to become aware, if we're going to fight anti-Semitism and hatred and be there for each other.
Yeah. And all that goes back to what I'm saying, because what is presented, one of my arguments of something I was raising earlier, is this whole conversation about the canon, right? Remember, I had to teach year after year, contemporary Western civilization, what the heck is that, right? And so, what is the canon? That's important. And that's one of the things that we're thinking about as you develop your curriculum, right? Well, what ought to be there? Is there something that's essential? And I'm asking you, because I don't know.
But I think the difference, just to finish the point, the difference was when we were here in the 90s discussing the canon, we knew what the canon was. There was a critique that was developed or developing about the canon. In this situation, I don't think we know what the canon is. And that's a big difference.
So we're just being vigilant, right? But
Yeah.
we ought to be vigilant.
I think we have to create the critique of the critique. If that makes sense. Dr. Amsel.
I'm struggling. I'm struggling because I think that we have a real difficulty in talking about a general process in order to avoid the faults of racism, which was so prevalent and continues to be prevalent. We have to be so careful of not generalizing across groups, in this question of generalizing across groups. And I think, though, that comes up against what happens in a situation in which the thing that you're objecting to is a group process, not an individual process. And I don't know how to talk about that, so I'm gonna get myself in trouble. I'm gonna say, it seems to me that within the Muslim world, be it even in America, within the Muslim world, anti-Semitism is ubiquitous. It is just ubiquitous. It is so to make a generalized statement would be absurd. So say, oh, all Muslims are anti-Semitic would be absurd. On the other hand, to ignore the fact that huge percentages of Muslim kids are just raised with this, as just a given. I mean, anti-Semitism is simply a given. I have a friend here from Egypt. I hope you'll help me out and let me know if I'm off here. Let me know. But it's simply a given. And that given has some, and it's a given, and it's also understood that it's not something that you can be fully honest about with other people. So you're dealing with a lot of people who have these beliefs, but they're not going to completely be honest with you about these beliefs because they know they're unacceptable beliefs within the Western classroom. And I don't know. So how does one go forward with that? How does one go forward when it's a kind of a, it's almost a known to a large, it's a known thing that you know, the protocols and things like this, it's so endemic in the culture. And how do we talk about that without turning without making, you know, racial generalizations? I mean, is it just about each individual? But it's not really just about each individual because it's embedded within a culture. If it was just about an individual, I could change people's minds. And I think you made a wonderful point about saying, I wrote it down in this way, which was that also the terror and the fear is brought, now I'm going to go back to the Hamas culture, that you're not a good Muslim unless you participate in this. Yes, your very identity is threatened. When your identity is threatened, argumentation doesn't matter.
Right.
It's identity. Identity does not change with argument. Right? Ideas change. I'm sorry, I'm confusing a bunch of different issues, but I'm just raising the fact that I think this is what's challenging. I think that Charles, this is what Charles, I think, has incredibly bravely taken on, you know, this very, very challenge where I think most people just look at this and say, it's an insoluble problem. It's an insoluble problem. I either will sound like a racist or I will ignore the issue and I just throw up my hands.
I don't know if I agree with that. One's identity cannot be changed by ideas. I'm not sure if I agree that one's identity cannot be changed by ideas. Don't know if that's.
So as an anthropologist, I'm not a very good anthropologist. All the words that you said are already problematic words. Identity, culture, the interior. I mean, those are concepts that need to be debated. So my approach is not that, you're not trying to change a student, I'm saying to a student, okay? You're not trying to change students' identity in the classroom. And if that's their expectation, which it often is, that's one of the things that has to be talked about at the very beginning, what you are going to accomplish and what you're not trying to accomplish. And the one word that seems to be missing are politics. This is a very political world. It's also a very, it's a world that's very, very polarized. People are not having the same conversations. They're not listening to the same music. They're not doing anything the same way. Generation gaps are not 20-year differences. They are 5-year differences. That's one of the biggest challenges that intellectuals and that professors have going into a classroom. Yes, Judith Butler is very important, but she has her counterpart. So are you going to a class because A, the professor's charismatic? Well, we all did that. Are you going to a class because you want to have your ideas confirmed? Well, unfortunately, that's become less and less transparent, even as we talk about transparency. And so perhaps those are some of the issues that are put on the board at the very beginning. So it's not so much the question of, I don't want to be a racist, so I'm not going to say something that's generalizing, but rather turning that into a question. And that's one of the dilemmas and the question that a classroom has to unpack.
So I'm going to push back, and I'm going to reject the idea that my words are problematic. My words are my words, I stand by them. I reject the notion that this kinds of discourse is problematic. I don't understand what it means, it's problematic.
Well, culture
Let
is
me
a
finish,
concept.
let me finish. Problematic, to me, is a very dangerous word. Problematic doesn't mean I'm right or wrong. Problematic means there's something ethically wrong about my using that.
No, I don't think so. Well, maybe this is
Excuse
a...
me.
Well,
No,
can I just-
let-
Well, why can I just respond? I just want to say that in social science, we talk a lot about problematica. And that means this is something I got to unpack. So it's just an idea. So there may be a disconnect in terms of the meaning of the word.
I'm gonna take the chance for Larry, please finish.
I'm pushing back against the being problematic. You can tell me I'm wrong, but the way I understand problematic is it's not an intellectual discourse. It itself has a moral penumbra, right? That I use that the categories that I'm using are am I problematic or offensive or not, and I have trouble with that.
But there's a library that's full of over 1,000 books just on the word culture, the concept culture itself. That is a major keystone of sociology and anthropology. And since the 1980s, there are huge volumes of debates. We can take a position on the debate, but the fact is, and that is a fact, like I can't doubt that I'm doubting. Culture, the term itself, as a social concept term, not as the way that it's deployed in the public arena every day, has a particular history and etymology to it, and it emerges in the 19th century. I mean, there's a whole history argument about that. And we don't have to solve that. The point is to recognize that these are words that are pillars for how we can unpack, how we can analyze a topic. Race is a term. It didn't exist in the 5th century, not the way that it exists today. If we don't teach about the history of race and the history of race thinking, we never get to the 19th century. We can't distinguish between Shakespeare's Othello or Shylock and whoever is writing right now racist tracts. They're coming out of different things. Any of you can unpack what I'm saying and go forward with it. The point is that there are sets of vocabulary that come out of the social sciences that are different perhaps or similar to the sciences that are probably in the social sciences close to the humanities, and those are the tools with which we come into a classroom when we assign a text. If it's to analyze Judith Butler and to dismiss her, to analyze Edward Said and dismiss him, we still are stuck with this terminology that we are supposed to be making more transparent to students than simply coming in with our own ideologies and saying, well, this is bad. And
Exactly, it's not the same pedestrian vocabulary. One thing is different. One is specialized, the other is pedestrian. One is you read in your books, the other you see on CNN.
I'm gonna intervene a little bit too.
Go ahead.
No, I'm gonna try and,
I told you there was a question.
yeah, but I'm gonna say something.
I'm not so sure I even use the word
Larry.
race or culture, so I'm not
Larry,
sure.
no, I think what Larry is pointing to, and I'm gonna try and be supportive here. In this discourse in the academy, And what's fantastic about this, I have a fantastic example. ISGAP Center, this program on anti-Semitism, if you go around St. John's College, the A word is not mentioned. We are the curriculum group, or ISGAP. Anti-Semitism is nowhere around this college.
I know
And
that.
that points to exactly what we're trying to do here. Exactly. And the paradigm and the labeling and I agree with what you said, how identity is up for contestation, power plays a large role in defining who's who and who's not who, right? And the fact is that we're trying to find a space to deal with this issue. I think what, I don't want to, Larry just need my defense, but I'll just say this anyways. I think what Larry is grappling with is what we're all grappling with. We need to find a space in the academy in which we can articulate freely the experiences of being faculty or students on campus in an anti-Semitic environment, where we can't say the A word, and where this presentation that David did is so important because it demonstrates that there's this genocidal anti-Semitism that's alive and well and being taught and propagated in the academy of all places, again, like it was in the 1930s. And we don't have a seat at the table to discuss these issues. We, Jewish kids, Jewish faculty who are concerned about global anti-Semitism. So I think the fact that the A word is not mentioned anywhere in St. John's, it's wonderful that we're here, and it's actually an accomplishment that we're here, and it means that we're doing something right, but we still can't say that word in public. And I think what Larry was struggling with, and maybe what we're all struggling with, is how do we say the word, unpack the word, and understand from an interdisciplinary, high caliber, serious perspective of scholarship and analysis where we are at this moment in our understanding of anti-Semitism. So as
Which word was this problematic, or was this word problematic with the word anti-Semitism?
I think
those are
I think that the fact that we cannot say the A word, the fact that Larry is like a leading scholar in his own right, you know, as some of us were saying how I think he's a genius, literally, you know, with all due respect, you know, he's struggling to articulate something. We are all struggling to articulate something. And the fact in 2017, decades after the Holocaust, and the layers of anti-Semitism that we've witnessed in the last few days at all sorts of levels, from religious anti-Semitism to Central European anti-Semitism to third world, in quotations, anti-Semitism, we're struggling. And I think this is an important part.
One quick footnote. And so this is a case study of what Lisa Delpit says. So this is, I present this for all of us, which is that the classroom is a position of power. And I've been in this position, I've chaired, you've chaired, but I just want to highlight as an explicit lesson that you are in a greater position of power than the rest of us, because you get to direct. You say, no, that's it, no more, no, and I might have a more valid, or in my view, at equal point, but it gets shut down because I'm not the chair. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong because I love you, you're my brother. But I'm saying that I want us all to recognize the privilege, like white skin privilege, like maleness privilege, right? Like motherhood privilege and a matriarchy, like fatherhood privilege, right? We have different kinds of privilege, and in this moment you have more privilege. And I just want to say that, not for you, because I'm putting you down, I'm saying it for all of us, because all of us are going to be cheering when we go back to our class.
I'm going to throw it back to you.
Because I feel you've shut me down, and I want to say that, no, Charles.
I'm not going to be shut down.
You shut me down.
You can speak after me.
But you shut me down. That's adversarial in a classroom.
Excuse me. Somebody addressed something to me. I will respond to them.
But it's an open conversation.
No, it's not. You just
well,
can't
maybe
answer.
that's part of the, maybe that's part of the issue.
David will respond to the questions that were sent to him. I'm keeping a list of people, and I'll put you on the list as the chair. So you're right. There is a certain privilege that goes with the chair. But that's not the point. Okay? And I think this classroom at one level is a drop in the bucket. How significant is this classroom? So, yes, maybe I'm the chair. I think I've been a pretty open chair. I don't intervene very often, and I allow these amazing scholars to come here and run sessions as they wish on topics that they choose, because I have complete respect in all the people that I invite here to speak and to participate. But yeah, and you have a certain,
Yeah, I'm just saying it is, yeah.
Yeah, so I'm chairing the sessions, usually very openly and loosely.
And that's the norm.
You have
That's not-
you also have a certain space.
I do,
place.
I'm- yeah.
In the ISGAP team, Michelle and Ira does as well. Phyllis does. Femi does as well. There's a few of us that have a certain sense of belonging that, people here for the first time don't have.
Lieutenant, yeah.
But the point is this, so, and I would argue that what you pointed is true, but it's relatively insignificant in terms, I know pedagogy is important, the classroom is important, these issues are very important. From my perspective, and I want to remind everybody here, we're living in a world now. I just came from Israel. I just attended a very important meeting on Iran's nuclear weapons and ambitions in Israel. And we're living in a world now where people openly and consistently are intending to and developing capacity to exterminate Jews. This is where we are now. It's coming from the Middle East, and it's also, amazingly enough, coming from the institutions of high learning in North America and Europe and other parts of the world. It's being propagated. People are making excuses for it. People justify it. And the fact that the A word cannot be mentioned in the academy, contemporary anti-Semitism cannot be mentioned in the academy, I don't know of another form of hatred with such a pedigree in the West, in these societies, that we still cannot say the A word. And I think that's the issue, and that's the challenge for us. The fact that contemporary anti-Semitism is not on the academic map. The fact that the A word can't be said in the dining hall. The fact that we have intellectual discourse and publications that promote the demonization of Israel, the demonization of Jewish people, as David so clearly set out in this paper, is astounding. I think this is the challenge that we have as scholars in our classrooms when we go back to our universities and teach our courses, hopefully for credit, as we're all here to do. But at the same time, to form a network of colleagues, of scholars, of students, of decision makers to really fight this issue in our midst, because we know, as Elie Wiesel said, and David and I were speaking about Elie Wiesel a little bit yesterday, that Elie Wiesel famously said it begins with Jews, but it doesn't end with Jews. And this is something that affects us all. And I think when a leading professor from Columbia University of Psychiatry, in good faith and goodwill, tries to articulate something, and it's difficult to, and it's difficult for all of us. I think it points to the fact that this issue is sort of it's not understudied. We're not on the map yet, intellectually.
I was
So that's what, so now
Columbia too. I'm saying
No,
there's
no, hold on.
I'm saying that. I'm saying that for that
Excuse
reason.
me, as a chair, I want David, a bunch of questions were given to David, and David's been silent for 20 minutes, so please go ahead.
So, it's very interesting. Somewhere in the last few minutes, the question concerning anti-Semitic attitudes that run throughout a society, like Egypt or Saudi Arabia or something in these countries. I can only speak from working with students from those countries. I've had students, as I mentioned, from Libya, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and Iran in my seminars. And it's all anecdotal, but they tell me, yes, where I live, the negative view of Jews is pervasive. It's on TV shows, it's in bookstores, it's in newspapers. It's sort of a given, as you say. I've had the students who come to Texas to the university come from upper levels of society. Or they wouldn't have the means to travel to do that. So I'm an Egyptian student now, whose parents, one parent is a physician, the other is a professor. Her parents are shocked that she's studying Holocaust, anti-Semitism. She's interested in Egyptian jewelry and anti-Semitism in Egypt. And she's had a very, she tells me, very problematic relationship with her parents over this. According to her, the parents are coming around. She's still their daughter. She's still, they love her. I've had a couple of a student from Syria, this was a few years ago, who was now teaching Holocaust courses in her religious garb, if you can imagine. Religious Muslim teaching classes on the Holocaust, community college in the Dallas area. And she said, I could never go back to Syria and do this. Where in those countries can you do a degree in Holocaust study? You can't. It's not an option. So they do, they do, just again, it's anecdotal. They tell me this is very problematic where I come from, my friends, my family, have, look askance at this at best, but in some cases, the friends and family start to come around. So, in other words, they become open to the idea that maybe we don't have to be anti-Semitic. I was speaking to Horace earlier, who had some very hopeful indications about developments in the UK and US and trying to make avenues into introducing a new way of thinking about the Jew, about others in that world. But it's a massive challenge, massive challenge. My student from Saudi Arabia is actually has an academic position waiting for him in Saudi Arabia. If you think you have to be careful here, he's got to be, and he knows it. He has to be very careful. When they go back, they have to be careful about to whom they talk about what they're doing, because they can cause them serious problems if they're not careful. And I worry about them. Every summer, I worry about them. Please, watch what you're doing, watch what you're saying. But they just a little piece of their world at a time. I think they're making a difference. And for them, it shows a lot of courage to even walk into a classroom of the kind that we do: Holocaust, anti-Semitism, Jewish literature, anything having to do with Jews and Judaism. It's a real courageous move on their part. And that has to be recognized, and I try to recognize it and support it. Yeah.
So Harris had a question.
Yeah, it wasn't a question, just a comment on something Larry said, and I will use some problematic language, but I'll do it in my presentation more than now. I think sometimes we can get confused by thinking that there's a difference between Muslim majority countries that have power, money and resource and pumping out information, and where Muslims are. And sometimes we think that the Muslim world, in inverted commas, because I don't believe there is such a thing as the Muslim world, is from the Middle East. Well, if you take all the Muslims in the Middle East, you'll probably still find less people than in Indonesia. That's the first thing we need to consider. So yes, there is a lot of petrodollars spreading out, lots of the stuff that David's talked about. Hamas, were funded by petrodollars and then by Qatar's gas dollars, if you like, for a number of years. And there are some things that maybe we can talk about how things are changing. So that's the first thing. Second thing is that in Pakistan and India, which again has more Muslims than the Middle East combined, in the 80s there was no such thing as a religious duty to be anti-Semitic. There was no such thing. I remember my father, before I went to university, when I was at university and I rebelled and sort of became far left, and I started developing these anti-Semitic views, or touching on them, said, what's this? Where's this come from? Totally alien. He'd never heard the Hamas stuff, neither did the immigrants, Muslim migrants that had come to this country and from India and Pakistan, etc. And he sat me down and gave me, he was a very pious man, very educated in Islamic scripture, lots of ijazas, etc., in lots of theology, and sat me down and said, this thing you're talking about, it's not right for a Muslim to be anti-Semitic. That's the 80s. Which gives us hope. Which gives us hope. Because I can prove to you, I can answer the Charter of Allah very, very clearly. The Hamas Charter, if you want me to. The Hamas Charter, the way they use the Charter of Allah, where they say that, O son of Abdullah, there's a Jew hiding behind a rock, kill him, and there'll be a war, etc., etc. Is it in the Hadith? Yes, it is. It's in Bukhari, it's there. Is it a Hadith that you should look in isolation? No. Is it a Hadith that traditional classical scholars looked in isolation? No. Is it a Hadith that Hamas looks in isolation to further its political agenda? Yes. How did traditional classical scholars interpret that Hadith before the Muslim Brotherhood came along? Well, they did it in the same way that Jewish scholars did it in Andalusia. Maimonides actually wrote extensive works about that particular Hadith and the end times. And what they said was that this is part of a collection of Hadiths that talk about the end time when the Messiah is going to be here. These are theological positions, first of all. And of course Muslims believe the Messiah to be Jesus Christ, peace upon him, and so do Christians. I think within the Jewish traditions it's not Jesus, but a Messiah. And they believe that there will be Muslims who will reject the Messiah. There will be Jews that will reject the Messiah. There will be Christians that will reject the Messiah. Jewish scholars have said similar things about Jews that will reject the Messiah as well, for whatever reason. And there are other hadiths that talk about this, and this is part of that collection of hadiths, that say that there will be, the people that will accept the Messiah will be good versus evil. This is in the Muslim traditions. People with goodness in the heart, who will go towards goodness, that has to be Muslim, will accept the Messiah. And there will be a battle. And the first battle, which Hamas don't tell you, 70,000 Muslim scholars will be killed. This is not Muslims. 70,000 Muslim scholars will be killed. Hamas don't tell you about that, because this doesn't suit their political agenda. Then they talk about so many Jewish scholars and so many Christian scholars as well. The way traditional classical scholars used the word Muslim and understood the word Muslim wasn't necessarily just somebody who said the Shahada. You could be Jewish or Christian and be someone who submits. Because the word Muslim means someone who submits to the will of God. And the classification was the Ummah, those who accepted the message and those yet to accept the message. For example, a Muslim man, because it was a misogynist time, a Muslim man could marry a Jewish or Muslim, as a Christian woman, without her having to convert her faith. And the argument then was, well, would God actually allow you to permit somebody who's a kafir? Would God actually allow you to marry somebody who was not part of the Ummah? And in the Quran it says very clearly, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَكَ إِلَىٰ رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. And it says, talking about the Prophet Muhammad, peace upon him, we have sent you but as a mercy for all creation. If the Quran is saying that he's sent for all creation, who is his Ummah? All creation. There's those that are yet to accept the message, whatever the message is, and those who have accepted the message. So, going back to the hadith. When they refer to Muslim in there, it's somebody who has accepted the message of the Messiah. And when they say Abdullah, it says slave of God. It's the Arabic for slave of God. Even the
Sir.
Christians in the Middle East, if you go to Jerusalem, use the word Allah for God. It's the Arabic word for God. So, there is hope, a lot of hope, looking back at traditional classical interpretations where anti-Semitism did not exist. It was imported, by and large, into the Middle East by people like Qutb, Sayyid Qutb, and Amin Husseini, and a number of other people, and I'll talk about this. Is it brave to be able to have these conversations? I actually am shocked, disappointed, and may well even write about this if Charles will permit me. And I did not know that we couldn't use the word anti-Semitism here. I really didn't know. I've lectured at many universities in the country, and the title of my lectures has, different lectures, has included anti-Semitism. I'm very shocked. And
It's not that we couldn't, but it's just how the college decided to
Exercise its power.
okay, fine. Okay, so I don't believe it's brave. I think it's a duty. I think to actually combat these xenophobias, whatever they may be, are a duty. There is reform work. Some of it has to come from within. But we can go back to traditional classical interpretations very, very easily. It's the Saudis, it's the Islamists that have closed the gates of ijtihad.
Thank you. Harris. Final word to David or
Yes, Haras, thank you so much for that, and thank you for the story your father said. Anti-Semitism is wrong for a Muslim. A few years ago, in the early 70s, Franklin Littell, a Christian theologian, wrote a book called The Crucifixion of the Jews, in which he says anti-Semitism for a Christian is blasphemy, not just wrong. Blasphemy is something else. I think if in Islam, some of the theologians, clerical leaders, and so on, could determine anti-Semitism to be not just, disgusting racism, but blasphemy, that would be a huge step.
I don't like the word blasphemy, but for a whole number
Or
of reasons.
heresy or whatever.
Yeah, well, yeah. Okay.
Contrary to the essence of the religion
Yes,
itself.
yes.
Anyway, thank you.
So on that hopeful part, we have no time. I just want to, we're going to continue the conversation at 2 o'clock. So on behalf of everybody, again, thank you very much.